Okay, this is the color version of the bird of paradise that I will be underpainting in acrylic paint. And this is the black and white that I'll be looking at as I add my values to my underpainting. So starting out, I had a nice little rough drawing. I'm taking a kneaded eraser and just erasing by rolling the kneaded eraser to remove some of the graphite. Taking a small pointed brush, and I'm just going to start very carefully adding some highlighted colors around the bird of paradise's body so I can get it ready for the first stage of this underpainting of the flower. I'll also be doing a first stage underpainting of the background, and then I'll enhance that background with a few additional stages, and then I'm going to call that completed for stage one. So what I'm doing here is, you can see, is very small amount of liquid, very small amount of pigment, so that I can just get a very faint color. And I'm mostly working around the edges where the shadows are. I'm going to take the larger brush just to block in faster some of the shapes that make up the background. Now, I like working with a really small brush, especially the pointed one, which will do the majority of the work for me. But occasionally, I like a slightly larger brush depending on the surface area, just to block in some of these major shapes a little bit faster. And once I go over something at this point, I don't really like to go right back over it. So I'll lay the color in and just kind of let it breathe, or let it live, I like to say. So as you can see, I'm just moving along, but I'm not going back over anything that I've already painted because it's already in the process of drying, and the last thing I want to do is lift off any color. By putting in this initial stage of the background, I get to start separating the foreground, middle ground, and the main subject of my painting. I'm using a blow dryer to air dry it, or to dry it, so that I can move a little bit faster. Now, to some people, this is totally unnecessary. They want to just go straight in, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I don't mind using the underpainting to help develop the picture so I can look over some of the difficulties I might have in painting the picture. But then also, I can also make subtle changes in my underpainting, and I could either leave them in or eliminate them in the final stage of the painting. Like right now, I'm painting around some of the stems that don't really exist in the picture with this first, what I like to call this first dark wash, because the initial wash was just tone. Now I'm starting to add value to the background wash, and I'm using this to help me to see how creative I can be in adding other elements that would be deeper in the background that's not necessarily visible, like really that sharply visible, but also they're not in the reference picture at all. So to do this, I have to be very careful when I decide where a stem is going to be, like that one. This is naturally in the picture, but then when I get over here, I'm just going to add another stem, see? And I'm just using what I call the negative space, painting a slightly darker value over that first wash that I did, to let that wash be the color of these stems. But as you notice, my background color isn't really dark, but it's just darker. And I'm using this again to help pop up the foliage and the main subject. But I'm also using it to paint in some varying different stems, lines, forms, to help give my picture some added extra life. You don't have to do this, and you don't have to take as long as I did to paint this. But again, when I'm painting an underpainting, I like to approach it as if I'm painting with oil paints or acrylic paints as a final product, so I can get a chance to see and feel how I would go about the actual painting in color later on. So at this stage, I'm still just developing. I put in a second wash, if you will. I've created some other background elements that maybe weren't in the picture originally. But now I'm going in with a third wash or a second darker wash. And even with that, I'm going to use that underpainting part that I painted a moment ago to also be stems, but they'll be of a different value. So you'll see some that are really bright and some that are really kind of dark and muted. And when I go for my third wash, I'm even going to add more. And the reason I do that is I like to have different values coming back at me. So when I finish in a few moments, you're going to see a lot more activity in the background and deeper into the crevices of the darkness, that eventually all of it will get really dark. And I may even pull some stems on that one. But for right now, I'm just trying to develop my background nice and easy, seeing if I want to add more elements, but also enriching the picture in stages for my own development. So I can kind of see where I'm going, get a feel of what I'm doing. And again, some of these changes that I'm making, I could easily eliminate them when the painting process actually comes into play. And I could also correct a lot of the misgivings that might occur during the underpainting stage. So there's a lot of reasons I like underpainting, aside from the fact that it gives a foundation for me to paint on, making my colors stand up a lot more, but also stuff like this where I can just use my imagination, add a few things, and then maybe when I'm painting, I'll even add more. But for right now, I'm just trying to make my background very busy. So having lines running in all different directions, all different values, it just, to me, gives the picture a little bit more interest. Again, some people may find this too much and don't want to do it at all. Just like underpainting, they don't want to do it at all, and I get that. But since I'm trying to show underpainting, I'm just showing you how I approach it, how I would go about it. And now after this gets dried, which I'm drying it right now with the blow dryer, I'm going to go in and add, for this stage of painting, the final level of darkness. And then even in that painting, I'm going to start pulling in some more uh, stems and twigs that are going in various different directions. But again, they'll also be in a slightly different value than I just did. So that's the point. I know it sounds repetitive and maybe even a little confusing, but if you look at the picture being developed, you'll start to see like sticks and twigs in various different directions that weren't there before, or they're not as light as the ones previously. And that's all I'm trying to say. So at this stage, I'm developing. I'm developing my background. I'm taking my time to see where I might want to increase some of the values to help pop up some of those stems for easy to see later on. And I could eliminate them, expand on them, add to them. And I really love doing this. This video is about 12 minutes and 22 seconds and is slowed down only to help show you a little slower and explain a few more things, but it's all the same. It's just washes on top of washes on top of washes. It's just layers on top of layers on top of layers. And by having these lighter values, I get to play with the layers, leaving some of the lighter value to act as its own highlight while I'm darkening certain areas to help build up contrast. So if you could look at the left side that I just was working on versus the right side that I haven't touched yet with this third wash, you can see how the development on the left looks a lot richer. And that's the whole point of the underpainting and my style of doing it like a painting, because it gives me that feeling of things that are going on behind the scenes that weren't not necessarily there to begin with, but now they're there and they add a certain amount of depth and element to the whole painting process. And I just like taking my time. I feel that any art worth doing is worth investing some time in. I don't need everything to be done quickly and immediately. And while this particular process was actually an hour and some change, to me it was an hour and change well spent. I meditated during it. I had a relaxing time during it, and I got a chance to be creative doing it. I seen some things that weren't there and I decided to put them in, and then I just kept compounding that. So it's almost like a wash, rinse, repeat. And it may seem a bit methodical and it may seem a bit mundane and to some people tiresome, but I find it very exciting to be at this stage of the development process where I get to look at the overall process, not from a finished standpoint, but from a beginning standpoint, because I'm just beginning. So this is going to be broken down into 3 stages. This is stage 1, where I'm developing the background. And I don't think I'll be finished with the background until I'm finished with the whole picture. Stage 2, some of those lighter values that you see that represent the greenery or the leaves, they're going to get a wash. Very similar to my initial wash, but then also they'll be developed a lot more. And as they develop, depending on the values that I'm going to need to represent them, the background may take another hit of darkness so that they'll have something to pop against. And the lightest part will be the flower itself. And that's my best explanation of this underpainting. Hello, everyone. Welcome to stage 2 of the underpainting, which I will be using a very watered down acrylic paint by Basics called Dioxin Purple. I'm washing the leaves, the stems, and a little bit of the main subject, which is the bird of paradise. The idea behind what I'm doing here is I'm looking at the values that I've already established in the sticks in the background itself, knowing that a lot of the values on the greenery, for example, are going to have to be a little bit lighter, but yet maybe slightly darker than the main subject. So I'm approaching this by just putting a light wash over all of the uh, greenery that's in the back of the flower. So I don't want to get it mixed up with the background stuff because that's laid in, that's done. Now I'm building up what I'm just going to call the foliage. And in doing this, it's my way of making it easier for me to see how I would paint this going along in color or monochromatic. So I'm adding the values very lightly, using the negative space to help create veins in some of the leaves, rather they're kind of spidery where they spin out from one side to the next side. Or in the case of the one I'm working on right now, kind of like stripes. And I like having these variations as well as color variations to help keep your eye moving about the entire painting, not really settling on anything except the main subject. And here I'm also trying to look at how to slowly introduce shadows and values without having to go too strong and then wish I would have gone a little lighter to build it up slowly. And again, I just want to preface this. This is just my way of doing this. And I don't think that anybody has to do their paintings this way. I just love to do it this way. And I'm going to try to quickly tell you why while you watch this. I'm working out all of the problems right now. Right now, the reason that I take my time and paint it so slowly and build it up so slowly is because I want to identify when I go to paint this, all of the areas that might present a bit of a problem. Any drawing that I've done, I'm actually correcting the drawing with this underpainting of tones and values. Sometimes I take lines out and reintroduce new lines, or I'll play with the shadows to see like how would I go about representing that. So for me, the underpainting is not only a great undersurface for the paint to lay on and a great guide to show me where to place the values of those colors. And in some cases, I'll be using one color and allowing the thickness or darkness of the underpainting to act as the shadow of that color itself once it's laid over. But I also get a chance to experiment and see exactly what's going to be a little bit of a hiccup for me. So in my correcting the drawing with the underpainting, I'll also be using the painting itself, whether it's monochromatic in a black and white or whatever the monochromatic color I decide to use in oils, or if I decide to go with full blooming color. I'm going to make corrections to this underpainting that same way. I could easily eliminate anything that I have here, or definitely minimize its visibility by muting it down a lot more than you're seeing in the underpainting. So this is kind of like a way of having a thumbnail sketch right underneath the painting that I'm actually going to be working on. And when I finish working on the finished product, you won't even see this. You won't see the drawing, nor will you see the underpainting. All you'll see is the finished product, and you'll never know what I went through to get there. But this is my process. This allows me a building block. I call it like I'm putting on the skeleton. Like this is like the skeleton where it has some flesh on it, but the real meat is gonna come, or the real flesh is gonna come when I put wherever I'm gonna put on the top of this. And that's where it gets a little bit final. Final in the sense that now I'm aiming towards a completely finished product. Here, I'm just kind of studying. So that's why it takes so long for me to do these things, because as I'm developing my underpainting, I'm actually developing my painting. So I'm using the time, the 1 hour on the initial stage, the first stage, the hour here on the second stage, which is reduced down to 12 minutes in this video, is so that I can play with the tones and values and what I want in it, what I don't want in it. And then I'm seeing things that when I go to paint this that I might add and or take away. So here's a great opportunity, I think, to not only develop my washing skills, because this thin down acrylic paint, it almost feels like I'm doing a watercolor. So even a watercolor, even though this isn't going to be a watercolor, but this could easily be a watercolor. This could easily be how I would transition my values and my washes, which is why I use the term washes, because I'm using acrylic paint with water. And acrylic is a water-based paint. So by washing these different values, if I wanted to convert this whole idea into a watercolor, I would even have the lesson already laid out through this underpainting style. So there's a lot of variables as to why I choose to go this route. Another one that's kind of slightly off kilter is sometimes I don't get an opportunity to paint as much as I'd like to. So here with these purple underpaintings, they can stand alone as finished products. I could not paint this for 2 years and it'll just sit there looking like this. I could easily strip the tape off and or put it back later if I just wanted to leave it as a standalone, because I'm using I'm using canvas sheets, canvas paper by Fredericks. You can get that from Hobby Lobby, Dick Blick, Utrecht, any places you want. Just look up watercolor sheets or watercolor paper. I mean, I'm sorry. Look up canvas sheets or canvas paper, and you'll find them. So this isn't even a full-fledged canvas. This is just what I like to idealize on, what I like to kind of play with and experiment with, and to show ideas like this how you would go about doing this. I could easily then take this idea to a stretch canvas or to a watercolor sheet, blah, 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 blah. So again, I'm looking at the fact that my background in this part that you see, I'm going in and I'm kind of adding another layer of less water, more pigment, so that I get a thicker layer of wash to go back into the background to help continue to pop up values, but also to create varying values, because the background could be similar to some of the colors that's on some of the leaves. So I need to go in and just make that a little stronger. Now in my painting, that's going to be black, so it's not really going to make a difference. And my black isn't going to be just jet black. It's going to be a combination of colors to make a dark. And that's going to become what you're seeing as the quote unquote black areas. And then the color parts will have variations of tones and shades in those colors, greens, oranges, blues, whatever it's going to be in the foliage as color. That'll be on the actual overlaying of this underpainting. But this is why I do this process, to develop the picture nice and easy. And this is how I develop stage 2.